So our topic for today is the Unit 2, entitled Addressing Diversity Through the Years, Special and Inclusive Education. So diversity encompasses acceptance and respects. It means understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. It is about the understanding each other and moving beyond simple tolerance to embracing and celebrating the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual.
Good day everyone, I am Vanessa B. Isguera and I am your first discussant for today. Our topic is about historical and sociocultural foundations of inclusive and special education. For the objectives, at the end of the discussion, you should be able to understand the foundations of special and inclusive education, differentiate the concept of special and inclusive education, and appreciate children with disability to have equal opportunity in learning. To begin, let us have this quote. Every child has a different learning style and pace. Each child is unique, not only capable of learning but also capable of succeeding. From Robert John Meehan. Every child learns in a different ways, and there are many learning styles utilized to determine a child's learning style. A child's learning style can ultimately influence how they learn. For an instance, a visual learner can understand or comprehend better if they can observe it. Inclusive education is a learning environment where children with or without disabilities are taught together as equals. This is about how we develop and design our schools, classrooms, programs, and activities so that all students learn and participate together. So, when we say inclusive education, this means different and diverse students learning side by side in the same classroom. In inclusive education, students with or without disabilities are given an equal opportunity to achieve their full educational potential. The inclusive education values diversity and the unique contributions each student brings to the classroom. In a truly inclusive setting, every child feels safe and has a sense of belonging. In general, inclusive education is about ensuring access to quality education for all students by effectively meeting their diverse needs in a way that it is responsive, accepting, respectful, and supportive. Now let's proceed to special education. Special education, known as special needs education, aided education, exceptional education, special ed or SEN or SPED, is the practice of education students in a way that provides accommodation that addresses their individual differences, disabilities, and special needs. It is an educational program or service designed to meet the needs of children with special needs who cannot profit from general or regular education because of disabilities or exceptional abilities. So, special education refers to a range of services that helps kids with disabilities to learn. It is the education of children who differ socially, mentally, or physically from the average to such an extent that they require modification of usual school practices. Special education is designed to meet the unique needs of a child with disability. Next, Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard of 1774 to 1835, a French physician and educator, one of the earliest teachers to argue that special teaching methods could be effective in education disabled children. Between 1801 and 1805, Itard used systematic techniques to teach a boy named Victor how to communicate with others and how to perform daily living skills such as dressing such as dressing himself. He is the father of special education. Ithar is recognized as one of the founding fathers of special education. He became the first person to develop a student-centered approach within his curriculum that emphasized the individual child. His work with Victor, known as the Wild Boy of Aveyron, earned him an international reputation. So let me discuss a short background about the Wild Boy of Aveyron. So in 1799, the Wild Boy was discovered in southern France. It appears that he was abandoned by his parents. The boy was taken into care in the nearby village because residents had reported seeing a young naked boy in the woods 5 years earlier. It was presumed that he had survived by eating what he could find. The boy later escaped, only to be found the following year. An official suggested that the boy was taken to Paris, where he could be studied as an example of the human mind in its primitive state. The boy was not found to be wild at all. Itard believed that the boy's mental deficiency was entirely due to lack of human interaction and that this could be overcome. Itard brought the boy, who he named Victor, to the National Institution for Deaf and Mutes and devoted the next 5 years to an intensive, individualized education program. That was the first example of an individualized education program, or EIP, and the beginning of modern special education. Ithar had been influenced by the philosopher John Locke, who maintained that the mind is an empty vessel waiting to be filled. Locke believed that all knowledge comes through senses. So Ithar used systematic techniques to teach Victor how to communicate and how to perform daily living skills such as dressing himself. Victor improved, but he never approached normalcy. However, the most important factor was that Ithar actually tried to help Victor during a time when it was thought that children with mental problems were unable to learn. As a result of Ithar's work, it became clear that there are critical periods in the child's development when he or she is particularly attuned to learning or developing a skill. The lack of interaction affected his relationship with others. He was unable to learn to speak many words, although his written communications improved more than his speech. The lack of experiences in his early developmental phases limited Victor's progress in later childhood. Through his work, Ithard was the first physician to claim that an enriched environment could compensate for developmental delays caused by heredity or previous deprivation. Early 1800s. Persons with disabilities were not taken in consideration and were often mistaken as being possessed by evil powers, cursed, or simply stupid. Blackhurst, 13. People during that time doesn't care much about persons with disabilities. They are not aware that person with disabilities has deficiencies, and people back then often believes that persons with disabilities were just being possessed by evil powers, cursed, or simply stupid. Those born with disabilities became an outcast and became beggars. With the beginning of 18th century and also the period known as the Enlightenment, ideas about education started to arise. The Enlightenment period influenced special education in many ways. So in 1800s, Enlightenment period. Jean-Jacques Rousseau of 1712 to 1778 publishes his Emile, a book about education of children. According to Rousseau, Learning should happen in agreement with the child's cognitive speed with minimal outer stimuli for society, which is known for praising social rules and wealth. These ideas of teaching children in their own pace set the ground for many educators, according to Johnston. Emile, his major work on education, describes an attempt to educate a simple and pure natural child for life in a world from which social man is estranged. Rousseau's aim throughout is to show how a natural education, unlike the artificial and formal education of society, enables Emile to become social, moral, and rational while remaining true to his original nature. On the 19th century, special education became more palpable with efforts from people such as Reverend Thomas Gallaudet and Samuel Ho in taking action on the matter special education. In Hartford, Connecticut, Reverend Thomas Gallaudet implemented the first school for deaf in 1817. The school was called American Asylum for the education of the deaf and dumb, and it is nowadays the American School for Deaf. The first class in the school had 8 students. They quickly learned many signs that Gallaudet taught them. For the first time in their lives, they were able to communicate with others. Samuel Gradley Ho. Ho was interested in the education of blind students and in 1829 found the first school for blind children in the United States. The school nowadays is called the Perkins School for the Blind and it is located in Massachusetts. Ho was also the founder of Massachusetts School for Idiotic and Feeble-Minded Children in 1849. Following the example of these two, other states started opening institutions that aim to educate disabled children. So in 1851, a school opened in Albany, and in 1853, the Pennsylvania Training School from Feeble-Minded Children opened as well. In 1857, Ohio State opened the Institution of Feeble-Minded Youth, and in 1858, the first school for retarded children was opened in Connecticut, according to Connor 63. With special education becoming more important through the years, in 1876, the Association of Medical Officers of American Institutions for Idiotic and Feeble-Minded Persons was found, and in 1878, 2 more special education classes opened in Cleveland. Changes were made also in what concerns the law of implementing special education in schools. In 1890, it was the state's responsibility to provide institutions for special children, and in 1897, the Department of Special Education was created by the National Education Association. In 1888, concerned parents were joined by doctors and interested community bodies to establish a home and training center for the blind. The movement attracted much public sympathy, and in 1893, the school was granted a government subsidy. From 1897, deaf and blind children were educated separately but were housed together. So that ends my discussion. The next discussant will be Miss Cabales.
Good day! I'll be the one to continue the topic discussed by Miss Isguera, and I hope that you find some spare time to listen and appreciate.
Alright, so let us first discuss about the 20th century. The 20th century is characterized by the implementation of laws to assure that people with disabilities would have their rights to education guaranteed. And it is beneficial for children and teachers to discuss the year or the history of people with disabilities, since it provides an overview for us to recognize. So, year in 1906, the New York University included in the courses offered by the school a training program for special education teachers. So in year 1918, all states recognized that all citizens have the right to education. In 1922, the Councils for Exceptional Children, or the CEC, was founded by Elizabeth Farrell. So in year 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed, and it provided funds for school in order to have a proper environment for children with disabilities. So in year 1966, it was the turn of the Education of Handicap Act, which was passed in order to grant funds to school to train teachers but also required a Bureau of Education for the handicap and the Office of Education. Also in year 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was passed and assured the rights of people with disabilities in respect to a non-discriminative environment and education, employment, and housing. It is thought in 1975 that the sum of a small acts toward the education of handicapped children emerged in one law, which is the Public Law 94 to 142. So this law guarantees that people with disabilities have the right for free and appropriate public education in at least restrictive environment. Also, it required that each individual has his or her own education plan, or the IEP, and that all people with disabilities had the right to fair a due process. Moreover, in year 1990, after being revised, Public Law 94 to 142 became known as IDEA, or Individual with Disability Education Act. It has been revised again in year 1997. Also in 1990, the American with Disabilities Act was passed, granting that implementation would be made to people with disabilities in the work environment, as well as in public transportation and telecommunications. So, let us now discuss about the SPED in the Philippines. So, SPED, or Special Education, refers to the range of services that helps kids with disability to learn. So, in 1908, where the School for Deaf in Harrison, Pasay City was established and marked the official government recognition of obligation towards the education of handicapped children. And RA 3562, an act of promote the education of the blind in the Philippines, which established teacher training course and Philippine National School for the Blind. Philippine Normal College offered an SPED for teaching blind in 1964, wherein 14 elementary teachers were selected for training. In year 1952, a pilot school for the SPED at the Philippines Women's University of Mentally Handicapped Children was started. All children from the school will transfer to the Special Child Study Center in Cubao, Quezon City in 1957. Also, this program supported by the following Republic Act. So the first Republic Act, we have the RA 7277, or also known as an act providing for the rehabilitation, self-development, and self-reliance of disabled persons and their integration into the mainstream of society and for other purposes. The second one, we have the RA 5250, or an act establishing a 10-year training program for teachers of special and exceptional children in the Philippines and authorizing the appropriation of funds thereof. Included also the Article 1, Section 5 of Child and Youth Welfare Code, or the PD number 603, state that the ultimate goal of special education shall be integration of mainstreaming of learners with special need into the regular school system and eventually in the community, and also to meet the individual educational needs of the learners and to extent possible prepare them for going to a more regular classroom setting. And also for the right to a more inclusive education is covered in several significant international declarations, including Universal Declaration of Human Rights by year 1948, and Convention of the Rights of the Child year 1989, World Declaration for Education for All year 1990, Standards Rules of the Equalization of Opportunities for Persons with Disability year 1993, UNESCO's La Manchain Framework for Action, year 1994, and also included the K-12 inclusion policy.
So, let us now continue the topic about the historical and sociocultural foundations of inclusive and special education. So, let's come now into the normalization. Treating people with disabilities as normal as possible in a natural environment. Both the means and the ends of education for students with disabilities should be as much like those for non-disabled students as possible. The institutionalization is a systematic drive to more people out of institutions back into closer contact with the community. So, as a teacher, it should always what we need to do. We shouldn't discriminate anyone. We need to treat everybody fairly. As a pre-service teacher, we need to put into our minds that kung ano ang turing natin sa isang regular na student, then ganun din dapat ang turing natin sa students na sa inclusive students and of course the special students or the students with disabilities. We need to treat anyone normal, then when we treat everyone normal, then that means we are making it available to all people with disabilities patterns of life and conditions everyday living which are as closer as possible to the regular circumstances and ways of life of society. In that way, we can show and express to them that we value them. Least restrictive environment. So, first, to the maximum extent, children with disabilities are to be educated with children who are not disabled. Removal may only occur when education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So, of course, we need to include children with disabilities to regular children for the disabled children to experience having friends. So, regular children can be a big help also. But, as a teacher, we need to consider that those kids who have special needs might need extra help in school compared to other kids that don't typically need or only need once in a while. So, next is the placement in the least restrictive environment. Regular classroom placement is the first option that we must consider. Access to the general education curriculum is as important as placement in a classroom. If it is not possible to educate 8 children successfully in a regular education classroom with the use of supplementary aids and services, then we must consider more restrictive alternatives. Of course, every student or learners needs a regular classroom regardless of what and who they are. Everyone has a right to access education, and remember that education is one of the rights of every children and human being. So, given that the children has the access to regular classroom, then a teacher needs to always have a backup plans and supplementary aids and services, especially when they are handling inclusive and special pupils or learners. So, let me give you an example. If I am assigned in a remote or upland areas to teach, then I always need to be ready to any kinds of problems. Pwedeng mag-provide ako ng mga materials for their activity na ibinigay ko sa kanila, or mag-iisip ako ng panibagong alternative na materials for that given activity. Next is the social validation and chronologically age appropriate. First is the subjective evaluation. Next, social comparison. And for the third bullet, the children with special needs must be with children of the same age. For example, do not put 15 years old to 16 years old. So, bakit dapat same age ang children with special needs sa iisang class? It is because they have the same traits and characteristics. Reminder, once na pinagsama natin ang isang 15 years old at 16 years old, pwedeng magkaroon yan ng conflict since they do have different traits and characteristics. That's why we need social evaluation and social comparison para alam natin yung mga appropriate activities and tasks na dapat nating ipagawa sa mga learners. So, principles of adaptation. Special needs require adaptation. First, adapt only when necessary to increase a person's participation, success, and enjoyment. Next, adapt on an individual basis. Be certain that adaptations are considered and designed for an activity are in fact relevant for a particular participant. Next is view any adaptations as temporary. We need to consider adaptations as transitional until the person can learn the skills and behaviors to participate in the standards or typical way. Some modifications like use of wheelchair may always be necessary. The fourth principle is adapt for congruence. So, any adaptations or modifications should make sense not only for the person using them but to others observing their use. Unique or exaggerated adaptations or modifications may have unintended consequences of further limiting the inclusion and acceptance of the person with disability. And the last principle is adapt for availability. Adaptive equipment, materials, and support provided in one recreation environment may not be readily available in another comparable environment. Consideration should be given to assuring that materials and services like activity aids purchased aren't so specialized that the participant using these adaptations don't have their options and opportunities limited to using them in only one setting. And let's now talk about the integration. Integration, moving them into school or society normally as much as possible. The physical integration, social integration, pedagogical integration. So, under pedagogical integration, we have here mainstreaming and inclusion. Mainstreaming used to refer to the selective placement of special education students in one or more regular education classes. Next is inclusion. Inclusion is education of all students in irregular classes. So, integration helps to reduce racial achievement gaps and encourage critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. Further, attending a diverse school also helps reduces racial bias and counters stereotypes and makes students more likely to seek out integrated setting later in life. It also brings children with disabilities learn alongside peers without disabilities. So we have here the key principles of inclusive education: the rights, participation, process, values, diversity, equality, and change. Education is the basic human rights. Everyone has a right to access quality education. And as for participation, it includes all the children common educational settings where they can learn together without any discriminations. It provides opportunities for the student with disabilities for the active participation equally. Inclusive education provides such learning environment that promotes all-around development of all learners together in the same educational setting, irrespective of their caste, color, and gender. So it is an approach which brings all children together in a common educational community. Every parent wants their children to learn or educate with all students in a regular classroom and became able to lead their life independently. And it is based on this principle of acceptance that of all children in education process irrespective of their disabilities. Principle of equality. So everyone has the right to access knowledge, skills, and informations. So as for principles of change, inclusive education is based on the principle of change, and it tries to change the system of education to meet the requirement of the child and not about the change of the children to fit the education system. It tries to include all the children for equal education irrespective of their differences. So in conclusion of this, it is the new concept covering wide range of areas. It includes all the children with or without disabilities and educate them in the same learning environment which provides personal, academic, and professional development of all learners, irrespective of their race, color, gender, and sex. It leads to a sense of belongingness within classroom community. It is the process of education which promotes social acceptance, peace, and cooperation. And that's all for our topic. Thank you so much for watching.